In the summer of 1976, New York City was a powder keg of fear. A faceless killer, armed with a .44 caliber revolver, stalked the streets, gunning down young couples in their cars under the cover of night. 6 people were killed and 7 were wounded. The city was paralyzed by panic. The man behind this terror was David Berkowitz, a 24-year-old postal worker whose descent into madness would leave a lasting mark on the city and its people. His name became synonymous with fear, the Son of Sam. David Berkowitz's reign of terror lasted over 13 months, from July 1976 to July 1977. He committed 8 shootings, killing 6 people and injuring 7 others, mostly young women and couples in parked cars. His weapon of choice was a .44 caliber bulldog revolver. It was in the quiet streets of New York, in places like Pelham Bay, Queens, and Brooklyn, that Berkowitz struck. The first attack took place on July 29, 1976, when 18-year-old Donna Lauria was killed and her friend, Jody Valenti, was injured. The randomness of the attacks left everyone on edge. No one knew who would be next. Over the months, more people became victims of this faceless killer. Carl Denaro, wounded on October 23, 1976, and Stacy Moskowitz, killed on July 31, 1977, were just a few of the victims whose lives were destroyed in the blink of an eye. Berkowitz had a clear preference for young women with long, dark hair, and soon, women in New York began cutting their hair short or dyeing it blonde in an attempt to avoid becoming the next target. As the killings mounted, so did the fear. The city that never sleeps was now gripped by paranoia. Every parked car became a potential death trap. The sense of security that once permeated the streets was shattered. Couples stopped sitting in their cars in secluded areas. Nightclubs emptied and vigilante groups patrolled the streets. The news cycle was dominated by daily reports of the killer's latest attack, and the city held its breath, waiting for the next tragedy. Berkowitz didn't just kill, he taunted the police and the press. Letters began appearing at crime scenes, letters signed Son of Sam. These letters were filled with cryptic messages, mocking the authorities for their inability to catch him. One such letter, sent to Captain Joseph Borelli of the NYPD, contained the chilling words, "I am a monster. I am the Son of Sam." Another letter, sent to columnist Jimmy Breslin, warned of more attacks to come. These letters only deepened the sense of terror, making it clear that this killer wasn't just committing crimes. He was reveling in the fear he was causing. The media frenzy surrounding the case reached a fever pitch. Newspapers like the New York Post and the Daily News fought to outdo each other in covering the story, and sales skyrocketed. The public obsession with the Son of Sam only fueled Berkowitz's need for attention. He was no longer just a killer, he was a figure of mythic proportions, a creature of the night who seemed to know no bounds. His letters, filled with references to demons and darkness, turned what could have been a simple case of serial killings into a psychological horror. The killer was playing a game, and the city was his prey. The nickname Son of Sam became the stuff of nightmares. But behind the name, behind the madness, was a man, David Berkowitz. His true identity was far from the twisted figure the media portrayed him as. He was a man with a history, a background, and a troubled mind. He wasn't born a monster. His life was marked by abandonment, pain, and a series of events that would ultimately drive him to murder. Berkowitz was born on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, as Richard David Falco. His biological mother, Betty Broderick, was a teenager when she gave birth to him. She was unable to care for him, and so he was placed for adoption. Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz adopted him when he was just a few days old, giving him a new identity. But his early life wasn't the peaceful, loving existence one might hope for. His adoptive parents were kind, but his life was marred by inner turmoil. As a child, he was often lonely, struggling with feelings of abandonment. He found solace in his imagination, but as he grew older, his rebellion manifested in small crimes, petty larceny, fire starting, and other acts of defiance. In 1967, Berkowitz's adoptive mother, Pearl, died of cancer. This loss was a turning point in his life, leaving him feeling even more isolated. It wasn't long before he joined the US Army in 1971, where he excelled as a marksman. His skills with a gun were impressive, but his mental health began to deteriorate. After serving from 1971 to 1974, Berkowitz returned to New York, a city that was beginning to change and where he would eventually descend further into madness. Berkowitz's mental state grew worse with each passing year. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and his delusions became more elaborate. He claimed that demons were speaking to him, particularly the demon inhabiting his neighbor's dog, Harvey. According to Berkowitz, Harvey was the messenger for a demonic force that compelled him to kill. These beliefs, twisted, irrational, and terrifying, led him to target couples in the streets of New York, fueling his need to kill and inflict fear. The shooting spree began in 1976, but Berkowitz's true identity remained a mystery. The police had little to go on. The killer left no clear patterns, no witnesses, and no obvious motive. The randomness of the attacks was unsettling. How could anyone predict when and where he would strike next? Berkowitz's taunting letters were both a gift and a curse for investigators. They gave the police something to focus on, but also complicated their efforts. The media made the case even more difficult for the police by releasing the letters. Despite objections from the NYPD, public speculation ran wild, and every lead seemed to spiral into dead ends. The killer was out there, lurking in the shadows, his next move anyone's guess. But the NYPD was relentless. They launched Operation Omega, the largest manhunt in city history. Over 300 officers scoured the city, following leads, investigating potential suspects, and piecing together the fragmented evidence. Every day brought a new tip, a new theory, and a new dead end. But one thing was clear: the killer was still out there, and the city was still in danger. By August 1977, the pressure was mounting. The NYPD's Operation Omega Task Force, a 200-person team, was beginning to feel the weight of the investigation. Berkowitz had already killed 6 people and wounded 7 more. His spree had lasted over a year, and the public's fear had reached a breaking point. The city was on edge. Restaurants, bars, and clubs were practically empty, and even the most ordinary activities, like driving or parking in your car, had become fraught with anxiety. The city was paralyzed by this relentless killer, and as each day passed, the tension mounted. The NYPD had a suspect, but they had no concrete proof. They had a profile of the killer, but it didn't help them find him. They had identified the .44 Bulldog revolver used in the shootings, but finding the weapon didn't lead them to Berkowitz. The killer had been so careful, so elusive, and yet there was one detail that the police had missed, a simple, mundane detail that would eventually unravel the mystery. It came on August 10th, 1977, a day that would go down in history as the moment the nightmare finally ended. The breakthrough came in the form of a parking ticket. Berkowitz had been issued a ticket for parking near the scene of his last murder, the killing of Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante in Brooklyn on July 31st, 1977. The ticket led investigators to a car, a Ford Galaxy, parked outside a Yonkers apartment complex. Inside the car was the missing piece of the puzzle, a .44 revolver, maps, and ammunition. With this crucial lead, the police were able to trace Berkowitz's movements. They arrested him outside his apartment in Yonkers that evening. Berkowitz was calm, almost eerily so, as the officers approached him. When asked if he was the son of Sam, Berkowitz replied, "Well, you got me." It was a moment of eerie calm that sent chills down the spines of the officers involved in his capture. The city had been gripped by fear for over a year, and now the man behind the terror was in custody. But the questions remained. Why had he done it? What had driven this seemingly ordinary man to commit such horrific acts? And why had he turned his killing spree into a sick game, taunting the public with his letters? Berkowitz's arrest shocked the city, but it also opened up a can of worms. His confession, however chilling, was far from straightforward. Berkowitz claimed that he had been driven to kill by a demon inhabiting his neighbor Sam Carr, or S-Dog Harvey. According to Berkowitz, it was the dog Harvey that commanded him to kill, ordering him to strike fear into the city. Berkowitz described his killings as part of a larger, twisted ritual that he believed he had to fulfill. But as investigators dug deeper, they began to question the veracity of his claims. Many, including FBI profiler John Douglas, dismissed Berkowitz's assertions about the demonic influence. Douglas and other experts believed that Berkowitz's motivations were far more human than supernatural. He wasn't just a pawn of evil forces. He was a man who had a history of mental illness and a deep-seated anger towards society. His delusions, they believed, were an excuse for the brutality he had unleashed on New York. As Berkowitz's trial approached, more was revealed about his life before the killings. He had been adopted at birth by Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a loving couple who did their best to raise him in a stable environment. But the cracks in Berkowitz's psyche began to show early on. He had been a troubled child, rebellious and prone to petty crimes, including fire-starting and petty theft. His adoptive mother's death in 1967 seemed to mark a turning point for him. After her passing, Berkowitz became increasingly isolated, and his mental health began to deteriorate. He joined the US Army in 1971, where he excelled as a marksman. But it wasn't until after his discharge in 1974 that his behavior became even more erratic. In the years leading up to the killings, Berkowitz's delusions had become more pronounced. He began to believe that demons were speaking to him, telling him to commit violent acts. He also believed that he had a special mission to carry out, one that involved killing women and couples in parked cars. His obsession with the number 6, the number of people he would ultimately kill, was a reflection of his warped mind and the delusions that had taken hold of him. Despite the chaos that his killing spree caused, Berkowitz remained eerily calm and collected in the days leading up to his arrest. He was meticulous in his planning, and even when things seemed to spiral out of control, he was able to stay one step ahead of the police. His ability to blend in with society, working as a postal worker, living a quiet life in Yonkers, allowed him to maintain the illusion of normalcy. It wasn't until the police connected the parking ticket to Berkowitz that his carefully constructed facade began to crack. Berkowitz's capture was just the beginning of the journey for the survivors and the families of the victims. For the people of New York City, the aftermath of the Son of Sam killings was profound. The psychological scars left by the killings lasted long after Berkowitz was behind bars. The city had been changed forever, and its residents would never feel completely safe again. The media coverage of the case, while extensive, also had lasting consequences. The press frenzy, which had only intensified the panic in the city, was both a symptom and a cause of the widespread fear. New Yorkers had become obsessed with the case, and Berkowitz had become the embodiment of their collective anxiety. The letters, the taunting phone calls, the endless speculation about his motives, it all served to fuel the fire of fear that consumed the city. But even after his arrest, Berkowitz continued to engage with the public. During his trial, he claimed that he had been acting under the influence of the demon dog Harvey, but many believed this was just an excuse for his actions. The truth, they suspected, was far more disturbing. Berkowitz was a man who had been struggling with mental illness for years, and his delusions were merely an outlet for his deeper psychological issues. He had targeted couples, particularly women, as a way of asserting power and control. His actions, while horrific, were not the result of supernatural forces, but of a man whose mind had been broken long before he picked up the gun. The case of David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, remains one of the most infamous and chilling episodes in New York SC history. It was a time when fear ruled the streets, and the killer seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. And though the city has moved on, the legacy of the son of Sam killings continues to haunt those who lived through it, and the questions surrounding the true motives of David Berkowitz remain unanswered.